In the heart of the peaceful village of Ubunye lived Rena, a young woman whose eyes sparkled with dreams and hope. Every day, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant hues, Rena strolled through the village paths, her heart filled with a quiet determination to make a difference. Despite the simplicity of her surroundings, she imagined a future where her aspirations could bloom like the vibrant flowers in her garden. Rena was married to Kwabena, a kind and caring man whose warm smile and gentle nature made her world a little brighter. He was always by her side, sharing both the joys and the challenges of life, and his love gave her the strength to face each day with courage. Yet, not all was harmonious in her home. Dominating the family with an iron fist was Mama Teboho, her mother-in-law, known throughout Ubunye for her harsh words and strict rules. Ama Teboho's constant criticisms and relentless demands cast a shadow over Rena's daily life, making each chore seem like an impossible test of her worth. Even so, Rena's spirit remained unbroken. With every kind word from Kwabena and every gentle breeze that swept through Ubunye, she clung to her dreams. Deep inside, Rena believed that one day she would rise above the cruelty that stifled her, transforming not only her own destiny, but also inspiring those around her to embrace hope and resilience. Each morning, as the sun slowly climbed over the hills of Ubunye, a heavy silence filled the small home where Rena lived with her husband, Kwabena, and his mother, Mateboho. The moment Rena stepped into the kitchen, she knew what was coming. Mateboho's sharp eyes would already be watching, ready to criticize every small thing she did. "Why is the fire so low? Can't you keep the house in order?" she'd snap, her voice as cold as the winter winds. Rena's heart would sink, but she kept her head down, not wanting to upset her husband or add fuel to the fire. The chores seemed endless, each task more grueling than the last. Rena was responsible for cleaning the entire house, fetching water from the distant well, and cooking the meals, all while Emma Teboho watched, finding fault in every step. "You're not doing it right," she would sneer, even when Rena followed the instructions perfectly. It wasn't just the chores that hurt, though. It was the constant barrage of insults. "You're lucky to be with my son. No one else would put up with you," Mama Teboho would often say, her words cutting through Rena like a knife. The younger woman's spirit, once full of hope and dreams, was slowly being worn down by these daily attacks. Still, Rena said nothing. Every evening, when Kwabena came home, she would smile softly at him, hiding the pain behind her eyes. She would never burden him with her suffering, not wanting to cause tension between him and his mother. She clung to the hope that someday, her love for him would be enough to protect her from the cruelty of Emma Teboho. But deep inside, the pressure was building. Rena could feel the walls closing in. She was trapped in a struggle she couldn't win, torn between the love for her husband and the oppressive weight of Emma Teboho's control. The longer this went on, the more the suspense grew. Would Rena remain silent forever, or would something inside her finally snap, unleashing the strength and resilience she never knew she had? Every day felt like the calm before a storm. Rena knew that one day something had to change. One evening, while dusting the old storage room that no one in the family ever bothered to use, Rena's hand brushed against something unusual. Beneath the clutter of forgotten things, she felt a cold, smooth surface. Intrigued, she moved aside the pile of old cloths and saw a chest, a small, weathered wooden box, its edges worn with age. It had been there, tucked away in the corner for as long as Rena could remember, but she had never thought to open it. Now, curiosity sparked within her, and she gently lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled between dried herbs and old trinkets, was an old leather-bound book. The cover was etched with symbols she didn't recognize, its pages yellowed and fragile. Rena's fingers trembled as she carefully turned the pages, the faint scent of aged paper filling the air. As she read, she discovered that the book was a treasure trove of family history, filled with stories and rituals passed down through the women of her lineage for generations. Then, one particular section caught her attention. It was titled, "The Rite of the Sacred Fire," and it was unlike anything she had ever heard of before. According to the text, this ancient ritual was a test of the body, mind, and spirit. The women in Rena's family had used it for centuries to awaken a hidden strength, a spiritual power capable of protecting them from any form of harm. The ritual involved walking barefoot over a bed of burning coals, but it was more than just a physical trial. It was meant to challenge the spirit, allowing it to break free from fear, oppression, and any force that sought to control or diminish the soul. As Rena read the detailed instructions, she felt an overwhelming sense of connection to her ancestors, as though they were there with her, guiding her through the words. Each page seemed to speak directly to her, encouraging her to believe in herself, to trust in the power that had been dormant inside her for so long. The book revealed that this ritual wasn't just about physical endurance. It was about awakening the inner strength that had been passed down through the women of her bloodline. But what struck Rena most was the mention of a special energy, a spiritual power that could change the course of her life. This power, she learned, could be used to break free from the chains of any cruel force. Amatebaho's control over her life, the constant belittling, the endless chores, and the harsh words, this power could free her from it all. For the first time in a long while, Rena felt a spark of hope. Could this really be the answer to her pain? Could this be the strength she needed to stand up to Amataboho and finally take control of her life? The book didn't just offer a ritual, it offered a path. It revealed that Rena, like the women before her, had this power inside her, waiting to be awakened. But the path wasn't easy. She had to be brave enough to face her fears, to walk the path of fire, both literally and metaphorically. The ritual promised that if she succeeded, she would not only gain strength but also the ability to protect herself and those she loved from any harm. As she closed the book, Rena's heart raced. She wasn't sure if she was ready for such a daunting challenge, but one thing was clear. She couldn't keep living in fear and silence. This hidden gift, this ancient power, was her chance to break free from the cruelty of Amataboho. It was her chance to reclaim her life. In that moment, Rena knew her life was about to change. The ritual was no longer just an ancient family secret. It was the key to her future. She could feel the weight of her ancestors' presence, and she understood, for the first time, that they had been waiting for her to find this power. The suspense built within her. As Rena realized, she had discovered not just a secret, but her own true strength. What she did next could change everything. She had a choice to make, and the path ahead was uncertain. But one thing was for sure, her silence was about to end. The day had finally arrived. Amataboho, with her cold eyes and commanding voice, gathered the villagers together for a ritual that would test Rena in a way she never imagined. The villagers believed it was a sacred tradition, an ancient test of strength and purity. It was called the fire ritual, and for years it had been used to judge those who were seen as weak or unworthy. The ritual involved walking barefoot over a long stretch of glowing hot coals. If the person was pure of heart and strong in spirit, the fire would not harm them. But if they were weak or undeserving, the fire would burn them, destroying their body and spirit. Amataboho insisted that Rena must perform the ritual. With a cruel smile, she told the villagers, "Let's see if this girl is worthy of my son." Rena's heart pounded in her chest as she stood before the blazing fire. The heat radiated from the coals, making the air thick with tension. The villagers murmured amongst themselves, watching closely. Some were eager to see her fail, while others whispered in fear, unsure of what would happen. Rena's feet trembled as she stood at the edge of the fire pit. She glanced at Amataboho, whose eyes gleamed with satisfaction, knowing that this was her moment to break Rena completely. "Step forward, girl," Amataboho commanded, her voice like ice. Rena's body felt heavy, her legs like lead, but deep inside, something began to stir. The power she had uncovered in the ancient book started to awaken. She could feel the presence of her ancestors, their spirits surrounding her, urging her to step forward, to prove her strength. With a deep breath, Rena took a step toward the fire. The heat was intense, but something inside her burned brighter than the flames before her. She could hear the whispers of her ancestors, their voices steady and calm, telling her that she was stronger than she knew. Each step she took felt like a challenge, but with each one, Rena grew bolder. She no longer feared the fire, for she knew she carried the strength of those who had come before her. The villagers gasped as Rena continued to walk across the scorching coals, her feet never faltering. The fire, which should have burned her, seemed to have no power over her. Her spirit was too strong, her will too unbreakable. Even Emma Teboho stood silent, her face a mixture of disbelief and growing fear. She had never seen anything like this before. With every step, Rena felt the fire's power diminishing, replaced by an overwhelming force that surged within her. The flames were no longer a test of her body, but of her spirit, and she knew she had already passed. When she finally reached the other side, the crowd was still, staring at her in shock. Rena's heart raced, but a deep sense of peace washed over her. She had faced the fire and survived. As she looked back at Emma Teboho, who stood frozen, Rena felt a quiet strength that she had never known before. The ritual, meant to break her, had instead awakened the power within her. The villagers, once skeptical, now watched her with new respect, seeing her not as the weak, frightened girl they once knew, but as someone who had conquered the fire itself. Rena had passed the test, and the fire had only made her stronger. But what was even more powerful was what came next. She had proven to herself that no force, no matter how cruel, could break her spirit. Just as Rena was about to step onto the fiery path, something incredible happened. The air around her seemed to shift. The heat of the coals grew even more intense. But it wasn't the fire that caught her attention. Suddenly, the world around her seemed to blur. And then, she saw them. Shadows began to form in the air. Figures of women, their faces glowing with a soft, otherworldly light. These were not just any figures, but the spirits of her ancestors. Rena's heart raced as she recognized them. Her great-grandmother, her grandmother, and other women from her family long gone. Their eyes were kind but strong, filled with wisdom and power. They surrounded her, standing tall and graceful, their presence filling Rena with a warmth and strength she had never felt before. Their voices echoed softly in her mind, filling her with courage. "You are not alone, Rena," they whispered. "We are with you. Our strength is your strength." Rena's fear melted away as she felt their protection envelop her, like a shield against the harsh world. It was as if the fire could not touch her now, because it was not just her walking this path, but the spirit of all the strong women who had come before her. Emma Teboho, standing nearby, watched in complete shock. Her eyes widened, and her body froze as she saw the spiritual figures surrounding Rena. She had expected to witness Rena's failure, to see her burn in front of the whole village. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. She could feel the power emanating from the spirits. The very air around Rena charged with an energy she couldn't understand. Emma Teboho's face turned pale, and her hands trembled as she took a step back. She had heard stories of spiritual forces, but she had never seen anything like this before. The very sight of it unsettled her deeply, filling her with a fear she couldn't shake. Rena, now filled with the strength of her ancestors, took her first step onto the coals, feeling a deep connection to the women who had gone before her. The fire didn't seem as dangerous anymore. Instead, it felt like a test that she was destined to pass. As she moved forward, the spirits remained by her side, guiding her every step, their protection surrounding her like a cloak. Emma Teboho stood motionless, her mind racing. She had always believed that her control over Rena was absolute. But now, she was faced with something far greater than she could have imagined, a force beyond her understanding. She tried to call out, to stop Rena, but her voice was drowned out by the overwhelming power in the air. The sight of Rena walking through the fire, with the spirits of her ancestors guiding her, left Emma Teboho paralyzed with fear. It was clear that Rena was no longer the weak, frightened woman she had once been. She had become something more, something powerful, something unstoppable. As Rena continued her journey across the hot coals, the villagers gasped in awe. They watched as the woman they once thought of as fragile and timid became a symbol of strength, protected by the very spirits of the land. Emma Teboho's face turned from disbelief to fear as the realization hit her. Rena was not only breaking free from her control, but she was also tapping into something far more powerful than anything Emma Teboho could ever comprehend. The moment Rena took her first step onto the glowing hot coals, the crowd gasped in disbelief. The heat was unbearable, and the flames flickered and crackled around her feet. For a second, it felt like time stood still. The villagers had always heard the stories about the fire ritual, how it could purify or destroy someone. They had seen people fail before, falling into the flames and screaming in pain. But here was Rena, walking forward with calm determination, as if the fire didn't even touch her. Each step was a challenge. The coals were hot enough to burn anyone who wasn't prepared, but Rena wasn't afraid. With each step, she felt the strength of her ancestors surround her, guiding her every move. The air around her seemed to shimmer with their energy. She felt like she was walking on something more than just hot coals. She was walking on the power of generations of women who had faced their own battles, who had stood strong against impossible odds. The villagers stood in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on Rena. Some of them couldn't believe what they were seeing. Others whispered in awe, their faces filled with wonder. It was as if they were witnessing a miracle. How could she do this? How was she walking across the fire without being burned? Some even began to question what they had always believed, unsure of how to explain what was happening before their eyes. Emetebeho stood frozen, her face pale, her mouth dry. She had expected Rena to fail, to scream in pain, to fall into the flames. But Rena kept walking, step after step, her feet light and sure. Emetebeho's mind raced. She didn't understand. This wasn't possible. Rena wasn't supposed to be strong enough for this. But there she was, crossing the fire like it was nothing. It was as though the very fire itself respected her, stepped aside, and allowed her to pass. Rena felt a sense of peace, almost as if the flames were not just a test, but a rite of passage. Each step she took felt like a victory, a moment of reclaiming her life from the pain and fear that had ruled her for so long. The fire, which once symbolized danger and destruction, no longer had power over her. It was as though she had become one with the flames, walking with the strength of her ancestors, untouched by their heat. The crowd watched in silence, unsure of what they were witnessing. The flames crackled and hissed, but Rena kept walking, her pace steady. It was as if time had slowed down, and the only thing that mattered was the moment she was in, the moment where she proved to herself and to the entire village that she was stronger than anything that tried to hold her back. When Rena finally reached the end of the coals, the crowd remained silent for a moment. Then a murmur began to rise. People whispered to each other, unsure of how to explain what they had just seen. Some believed they had witnessed a miracle. Others simply stood in awe, their eyes wide with respect. Rena had done the impossible. She had walked across the fire, defying all odds, and in doing so, she had proved something far more important than just her strength. She had proven her unbreakable spirit. As she stood there, her feet unharmed, Rena felt a wave of pride and relief wash over her. She had faced the fire and emerged victorious. The village would never see her in the same way again. And as she turned to look at Emetebeho, Rena knew that this was only the beginning of her journey. As Rena stepped off the hot coals, the crowd remained still, their eyes wide with disbelief. The fire had not touched her, her feet were unharmed, and her spirit stronger than ever. But Emetebeho, standing at the edge of the fire pit, couldn't believe what she was seeing. The power that Rena had shown was not something she could understand. It was beyond her control, beyond anything she had ever imagined. Emetebeho's eyes narrowed with anger. She couldn't allow Rena to win. She had always seen herself as the one in charge, the one who held all the power in the family. She had expected Rena to fail, to be humiliated. But now, her whole world was crumbling. Desperation and fear began to twist inside her. She stepped forward, trying to approach Rena, her voice trembling as she shouted, "No, this is impossible. You cannot be stronger than me." But as she moved closer, something strange happened. The air around Rena seemed to thicken, like an invisible force was pushing against Emetebeho. A wave of energy radiated from Rena, and it was as if the very ground beneath her feet was shifting. Emetebeho stopped in her tracks, her body suddenly heavy. She felt as if something was holding her back, a force stronger than anything she had ever felt before. Her legs shook, and before she could even react, her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the ground. Tears of frustration and fear filled Emetebeho's eyes. She tried to rise, but she couldn't. It was as if an invisible hand was pressing her down, forcing her to stay on her knees. The power that emanated from Rena was overwhelming, and Emetebeho realized with a shock that she had been fighting against something far greater than her. This was no longer about control or power. This was something spiritual, something ancient, something that she could never overpower. As she knelt on the ground, her pride and authority shattered. Emma-Teboho's mind raced. She had always thought she could control everything, especially Rina, but now, for the first time, she saw the truth. Rina wasn't just a weak woman to be controlled. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had found her strength, and the power of generations before her was now awakening. Emma-Teboho had underestimated her, and now she was paying the price. Rina, standing tall and unshaken, looked down at Emma-Teboho with a calm that only deepened her power. She could see the fear in Emma-Teboho's eyes, the woman who had made her life miserable, the woman who had tried to break her. Now, Emma-Teboho was the one who was broken, and for the first time, Rina realized that she no longer needed to fear her. Emma-Teboho's hands trembled as she tried to rise, but the energy surrounding Rina held her down. She had fought against the wrong force, and now she was helpless. It was a moment of reckoning, one that Rina would never forget. The woman who had once tried to control her was now kneeling at her feet, defeated and broken. As Rina stood tall, her heart beating with the power of her ancestors, she could feel something shifting within her. The fire had not burned her, and now she had broken free from the control that Emma-Teboho had tried to place on her. She was no longer the frightened, obedient woman the village had once known. Something had awakened in her, a strength that went far beyond physical power. It was the strength of her spirit, the strength of her bloodline, and the strength of all the women who had come before her. The villagers, who had once whispered behind her back, now looked at her with new eyes. The silence in the air was heavy with awe and respect. They could feel the change in the air, the energy that surrounded Rina like a force field. They no longer saw her as the quiet, submissive wife of Kwabena, but as something more, something powerful, something chosen by the spirits themselves. They began to murmur among themselves, calling her the chosen one of the spirits, a woman destined for greatness. Rina felt the weight of their respect, but also the pressure that came with it. She had not asked for this power, but now that she had it, she knew she couldn't turn back. She had to rise, to stand strong for herself, for her family, and for the entire village. Among the crowd, her husband, Kwabena, stood silently, watching his wife with a mixture of emotions. For so long, he had been torn between his mother and his wife. His love for Rina had always been there, but his mother's influence had clouded his judgment. He had been afraid to choose between them, afraid of causing pain to either one. But now, seeing Rina standing strong, the power that radiated from her undeniable, he realized the truth. His heart filled with pride and love for his wife. He could no longer deny the strength that she had inside her. Rina was no longer the quiet woman he had married. She had become something extraordinary. He stepped forward, pushing past his fear, and walked towards her. The entire village watched in silence as Kwabena knelt before Rina, his head bowed in respect. "My love," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I have seen the truth now. I see your strength, your power, and your spirit. I have been blind, torn between my mother and my wife, but no longer. I choose you. I stand with you, always." Rina's heart swelled with love as she reached out to him. For the first time, Kwabena wasn't torn. He wasn't standing between two forces. He was standing beside the woman he loved, the woman who had become a force of nature in her own right. The years of pain and fear were over, and together they would rise. The villagers, who had been watching the scene unfold, began to cheer. The power of Rina had not only broken the chains of her past, but had also united her with the man she loved. Her rise wasn't just about her own strength. It was about bringing her family together, about showing the world that love, courage, and strength could conquer anything. As Rina and Kwabena stood side by side, hand in hand, the village finally understood. Rina wasn't just the chosen one of the spirits. She was a symbol of hope, of resilience, and of the power that lies within every woman. She had proven that no matter how hard the journey, no matter how strong the obstacles, true strength comes from within, and with love, anything is possible. The tension in the village was thick as Emma-Teboho, consumed by jealousy and fear, stood facing Rina once again. The power Rina had shown during the fire ritual had shaken her to her core, and now She was determined to stop her once and for all. Her pride, bruised and broken, demanded that she maintain control, no matter what. With her fists clenched, Emateboho approached Rena, her eyes filled with anger. "You think you're stronger than me now?" She sneered, her voice trembling with fury. "You think you can defy me? I am your mother-in-law. You will never be free from me." Rena stood tall, her heart steady and her spirit unshakable. She had faced too many years of fear and suffering under Emateboho's cruelty. She wasn't that woman anymore. The power of her ancestors and the strength she had found within herself had transformed her. "I don't need to fight you, Emateboho," Rena said calmly, her voice full of confidence. "The power inside me is stronger than your hatred." But Emateboho was not ready to back down. Her jealousy and fear clouded her mind, pushing her to make one final attempt to break Rena. She lunged at Rena, trying to grab her, to shake her, to break her spirit once and for all. But Rena didn't flinch. She didn't move. With a swift motion, Rena raised her hand, and a wave of energy seemed to explode from her, surrounding her like a shield. It was as if the spirits were with her, protecting her, giving her the strength to resist Emateboho's anger. The force of the energy pushed Emateboho back, sending her stumbling to the ground. The crowd, which had been watching in silence, gasped as they saw the power Rena commanded. Emateboho, humiliated and defeated, scrambled to her feet, her face twisted in rage. But this time, it was different. The villagers could see that Rena was not just the wife of Kwabena. She was a woman who had found her true strength, and nothing, not even Emateboho's fury, could break her. Emateboho, on her knees once again, realized the truth. She had lost the power she had once relied on. Her control over her family, her manipulation of others, was gone. Rena had become something far more powerful than she could ever be. Emateboho's body shook with anger, but inside there was a flicker of fear and realization. She had underestimated Rena. She had tried to break her, but Rena had only grown stronger. With one final desperate attempt, Emateboho tried to pull Rena down, to drag her into the same place of fear and weakness where she had once been. "You think you've won, but I will always have control," she shouted, her voice hoarse with frustration. But Rena didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than words. She stood there, unshaken, her power evident in the calmness that radiated from her. Emateboho's desperate attempt to drag Rena down had failed, and she knew it. Defeated and broken, Emateboho finally dropped her gaze to the ground, her shoulders slumping in defeat. For the first time, she saw Rena for who she truly was, a woman who had claimed her strength, who had risen above the cruelty and fear, and who would no longer be controlled. The villagers, witnessing this moment of victory, cheered for Rena, knowing that she had won, not just over Emateboho, but over every challenge and obstacle that had tried to break her. And as Emateboho accepted her defeat, the village knew that Rena's rise was just the beginning of a new chapter, one of strength, love, and freedom. In the end, Rena's strength transformed not only her life, but the entire village. After facing years of mistreatment and cruelty, she had finally found her true power. The once quiet woman, who had been pushed around and belittled, now stood as a symbol of hope and courage. The villagers, who had watched her struggle in silence, now looked at her with deep respect and admiration. Her journey had shown them that no matter how difficult life gets, there is always a way to rise above, to find strength, and to stand tall. Emateboho, the woman who had tried to break Rena, was now humbled. She had tried to control and manipulate, but in the end, it was her own pride and jealousy that had led to her downfall. She knelt, defeated and broken, realizing that her efforts to destroy Rena had only made her stronger. Emateboho had learned a painful lesson. No one can control another person's destiny, especially when that person has found their inner strength. The villagers came together to celebrate Rena's victory. They sang, danced, and praised her for the courage she had shown. What had begun as a struggle for survival had become a celebration of triumph. Rena's story spread far and wide, becoming a legend of empowerment. It wasn't just a story about a woman overcoming her mother-in-law. It was a story about resilience, about refusing to be silenced, and about the power that comes from within when you trust in yourself and your love. Kwabena stood beside her, proud and full of love for his wife. He had once been torn between his mother and wife, but now he understood that true strength wasn't about choosing sides. It was about supporting the person you love and helping them find their own power. He had seen Rena rise, not just as his wife, but as a leader in her own right. And he knew without a doubt that together they could face anything. Rena's journey had not been easy, but it had shown everyone that love, faith, and strength could overcome even the darkest forces. Her courage and resilience had changed her life, and it had changed the village forever. Her story became a powerful reminder to all that no matter how cruel the world may seem, there is always a way to rise, to find your voice, and to become the person you were always meant to be.